Hey there, I'm Jessica Lauren Walton, and this is the Insecurity Podcast. If there's a cool story in the security field or just something that I think is going to be valuable for my fellow professionals, then I want to talk about it. To learn more about the work I do as a writer, you can go ahead and visit my blog at jessicawaltonwriter.com. Today's guest is General Amir. He is a distinguished Israeli military leader and the founder of the Israel Defense and Security Forum, the IDSF, or in Hebrew, Habitchonistim, an NGO dedicated to promoting Israel's security and strategic interests. With decades of experience in the Israeli military, or IDF, Amir has held senior positions in military intelligence, counterterrorism, and national security, contributing significantly to shaping Israel's defense policy. In our following conversation, Amir and I will discuss the psychological aspects of the current war between Israel and Gaza, as well as the geopolitical dynamics impacting the wider region of the Middle East. For example, what led to the intelligence failure of October 7th in Israel, and what can other defense establishments learn from this situation? How do we draw the line between clear victory and defeat, or dismantle the propaganda mechanisms that stay in the way of true peace and reconstruction? Amir's organization is growing in influence in Israel and is comprised of senior reserve officers and operatives from all branches of the Israeli security forces. They are dedicated to ensuring the country's national security needs for the long term. You can check out the link to his organization below if you'd like to learn more. Since the beginning of the war, Amir has also been providing daily briefings on YouTube. So if you would like to sign up and follow him to learn more, you can check out the link right here. All right, my Hebrew is a little on the rusty side since I returned to the U.S. a few years ago, as fadicha alai. But we're going to give it a try anyways. So yalla, let's get in there and start talking to Amir. Shalom, Amir, Baruch haba. Thank you for taking the time today to provide your insights on the ongoing war between Israel and Gaza, as well as your outlook on the broader geopolitical dynamics in the region. Given the complexities and pervasive disinformation surrounding these issues in the Middle East, your firsthand experience as an Israeli general offers a crucial and nuanced perspective on the conflict. Yalla, getting started.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, let's do it. You previously mentioned that the intelligence failure on October 7th was partly due to a fixed mindset within the defense establishment, referred to as the concepcia. Despite your warnings, many senior officials believe that Hamas no longer pose a significant threat, right? And they filtered contradictory information to fit that belief. So several years ago, during my master's degree program in security intelligence in the U.S., we studied cognitive biases and blindnesses that are common among analysts and intelligence communities. So obviously, this is not just an issue for Israel, but a broader challenge for all defense establishments. So drawing from your experience, how can Israel and other defense communities restructure their thinking to avoid such cognitive biases and improve decision-making moving forward?
So I think, in the Israeli intelligence community, there is a big difference between the amazing intelligence that the IDF, the Mossad, the Shin Bet are able to get talking about military targets, terrorists. We saw the pagers in Lebanon. We saw how the IDF can really know every missile, where it is, and target it. Really amazing. But when it comes to strategic intelligence, this is where we see the serious problems. And because at this stage, we see a tendency to disregard the intelligence, the thinking on worldviews. So, for example, the idea that Hamas is deterred and they don't want a war, no matter how much they're training, how much they're equipping, all this endless amount of tunnels and capabilities, and still the Israeli Defense Forces convince themselves, and also the Shin Bet, that overall Hamas is deterred and it's not interested in war. Why? Because it fitted what they wanted to happen. And I think that one of the things that Hamas learned to do is feed the intelligence with what they want. They see what Israel seeks, and then they even talking among themselves and the messages they send, really they understood the mindset and also played this game that they are not really interested in war, and this really affected the intelligence community. At the same time, we in IDSF, in the Bitchonistim, 2 years before the war, we said war is imminent. It's coming. It's going to happen. We saw it coming, and this is without having A200 and endless amount of intelligence. Why? Basic common sense. And sometimes it's not enough to have intelligence. You need common sense.
Right. We think about, for example, what happened with the Yom Kippur War. That was also considered a major intelligence failure. And part of the hot wash, so to speak, after the war included mechanisms for ensuring, to the best of our abilities, that something like that wouldn't happen again. So what kind of mechanisms do you think should be put in place in the defense establishment to avoid an intelligence failure like we just had on October 7th?
So basically, one of the lessons learned in 73 is build a whole unit that tries to think out of the box and challenge what the intelligence community is saying. So from a whole unit, they, dismantle it more and more until they had like 2-3 people remaining from all this unit, which had no impact really on the thinking and on the decision making.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is a big mistake. And the other thing is, and this is talking about the cabinet, prime minister, the ministers,
Right.
to have their own, free assessment and not rely completely just on the officers in the army when assessing things on the national level.
So do you see an increased role for the private sector?
So I think that for a start, our politicians need to really also rely on their instincts and not only on what the chief of staff or the head of intelligence says. They also see the raw materials, they see the assessment and the intelligence, and they should use their own experience and the way they look at reality to challenge, what the army says. And at the end of the day, it's their responsibility. They are the ones that take the decisions, whether to go to war, not to go to war. And sometimes it needs to be done accepting what the recommendations of the army are, and sometimes not.
Right. And we're talking about it also kind of on a macro level, but even on a micro level, like as an analyst, if you're used to seeing something in a certain framework, I mean, what advice would you give to an analyst who doesn't want to be stuck in that framework, doesn't want to make some kind of analysis that leads to an intelligence failure?
So I think that it's very important to have around you people with other views. I always enjoy listening to people that think differently from me. And I try to take seriously what they say, and I try to analyze it and think about it and say to myself, are they right? I mean, are they presenting viable, valuable information, viable to the issue? And I think that the tendency of people to surround themselves with people that think exactly like them, that's the biggest mistake. You need to be open to listening to people who think differently and who think out of the box. What we saw in the army is that many of the officers that were promoted were all alike. It was like an army of minions. Everybody, looks the same, thinks the same. Nobody's challenging. Nobody's thinking out of the box. And those who actually thought out of the box, at the end of the day, finished their career and were not promoted. This is not the kind of culture you are supposed to have in a healthy organization. No organization, by the way, not just talking about the army, but when it comes to the army or the Shin Bet, this has to do with lives. This has to do with our existence. It's not a joke. So you really, really need people to all the time think out of the box and challenge, every kind of thinking.
Well, speaking of different applications, I think a lot of American college students could take that advice as well.
Yeah. By the way, I'm also in favor of using AI. I think that one advantage you can have from a machine is that machines, they don't have bias. I mean, they don't have worldviews. So if you feed the machine all the information you have, and you ask, okay, what's the outcome? It's supposed to give you, some kind of understanding of where things are going, without having human bias in the process. I'm not saying we have to rely on this, but it's
Right.
certainly a tool that can be used to try to see how things look if you just look at the data and not start imagining, by yourself what the data means and how you interpret it.
Interesting. Right. So acknowledging also the limits of human understanding.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So, in a similar psychological vein, former Israeli parliamentarian Anat Wilf once stated that the tragedy of both Palestinians and Israelis lies in the Palestinians' refusal to accept defeat after repeatedly failing to prevent the establishment of a Jewish state. She compares this to post-World War II Japan, where defeat was eventually embraced to rebuild. Wilf suggests that instead of acknowledging their losses, Palestinians have been repeatedly saved by external factors such as UNRWA, allowing them to cling to the belief that they can still ultimately win. So this denial of defeat, she contends, has prolonged the conflict. So drawing from such historical examples, and I know you do have an in-depth understanding of a lot of history, do you believe there is a way in this current war to shift the Palestinian mindset from denial of loss to acceptance in order to break the cycle of conflict?
So the whole essence of the Palestinians is to really build themselves on Jewish history. Saying things like Moses was Palestinian or Jesus was Palestinian, or trying to really take all Jewish history and say this is not Jewish history, this is our history, basically inventing from scratch a nation that has no history and never existed. And because they are not building their own story and trying to build their own culture, this creates a huge problem. The other thing is that, when Israel decided to try to push some kind of agreement in Oslo, it did a very poor choice. It took a vicious terror organization, the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, that is devoted to the complete destruction of the state of Israel and the Jewish people, and gave them control over this society. And the result was devastating. In Gaza, for example, we implemented Oslo in the cities, the Palestinian cities in Gaza in 1994. At that time, these cities were in the Stone Age, literally. The Palestinian Authority, which was built on the PLO, took Gaza in 7 years from the Stone Age, literally, to shooting rockets. And in 10 years, to complete loss of control over these cities, and this is prior to the disengagement. So I think that any hope for any change in this society can be based only on one thing, on really dismantling all these terror organizations and working with the local leadership of the Palestinians, the clans of the different cities. And I think that it's interesting that now in Gaza, looking at the day after, the government is saying the day after there won't be Hamas, not Palestinian Islamic Jihad, but also not the Palestinian Authority. And this requires in Gaza to build a whole new concept, which will be based probably on the local clans and the process trying to build a new relationship, which also requires a process of de-radicalization, which is crucial to change the mindset. If you don't change the education and the basic ideology, there is no way to move towards a different future. They will be educated again and again to carry out terror attacks and to really push a vision of the complete destruction of the state of Israel.
Right. So that de-radicalization is really key to convincing the Palestinian population to accept the Jewish state, right? When we disengaged from Gaza in 2005, that was an opportunity to build a state, but it was clear that the interest was not to build a state, but to destroy the Jewish state, right?
Right. Palestinians have never recognized the right of the Jewish people to have a state. You won't find one map anywhere in the Palestinian society that visions a two-state solution. It's all Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. In this scenario, the Jews are in the sea. There is no Israel.
So just bringing it back to this application I was talking about, right, about World War II, post-World War II and Japan, obviously we're talking about a different culture, but still there was a clear victory and a clear defeat. I think this is something applicable, to the American side as well. I would say since the Vietnam War, we haven't really had any wars where there was a clear defeat and a clear victory, right? And so how do you expect, especially when you're talking about the Israelis and Palestinians who are neighbors, how do you kind of convince them, so to speak, that, hey, you've lost the war, now real reconstruction can begin?
So I think that looking overall at this war, even beyond the Palestinians who are fighting in 7 different fronts, we have an historical opportunity to have total victory. And that total victory in this war means completely dismantling Hamas as a governmental and military entity, bringing back all the hostages, creating the terms that never again there will be a terror army in Gaza. It also means creating the terms for Hezbollah not to be able again to rebuild itself. But more than that, it means defeating Iran, destroying their nuclear sites and military capabilities, hopefully, by the way, with the new administration, with the American leadership and the Americans leading this attack. Israel set the stage. We pretty much destroyed Hamas and Hezbollah. We took out all the air defense of Iran, and now it's time to bring down the Shia axis. And from there, to go to regional peace. I think that the path towards victory in relation also to the Palestinians is first dealing with the Shia axis in a way that Iran cannot equip them, fund them, and build these terror organizations in the Palestinian society. It means also moving towards regional and global peace and alliance, a Western Israeli Sunni alliance, normalizing relations not only with Saudi Arabia, with the whole Sunni world, and an alliance that will extend to Indonesia, Malaysia, Pakistan, Oman. And in this scenario, when you talk about the Palestinians, basically you take from the equation their ability to prevent Israel from moving towards peace agreements with other Arab countries, as we did in the Abraham Accords. And the last but not least thing is, in this coming administration, to apply sovereignty over vast areas in Judean Samaria and the Jordan Valley, as was planned when Trump was in his first administration. If you ask me what is victory, millions of Jews settling the land is victory. And I think that most of Israelis want some kind of self-governance for the Palestinians in the areas they control, but they don't want solutions that mean that Israel cannot exist, like withdrawing, from the heart of our land, from the mountains and from the Jordan Valley. So if we really go through all this process, if we do de-radicalization in Gaza, if we get rid of the Palestinian Authority, that is like a cancer. It endangers Israel, and not only Israel, all the delegitimation, all the anti-Semitism we are experiencing in campuses, Hague, all of this is ignited by the Palestinian Authority. It's a very, very dangerous organization. We need to work with the local leadership, and we need to make sure that they move towards economic incitement and not, they want to promote economy and not educate the young generation to hate Jews and conduct terror attacks.
It's interesting. I'm thinking, as you're speaking, this concept of the map, right? So I have a friend from Afghanistan, and recently she wanted to start educating herself about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And she comes back to me and she says, Jessica, I'm just starting to learn the basics, and there's something I'm really confused about. She said, I've seen a map of Israel, and I've seen a map of what the Palestinians consider Palestine, and she says it looks like it's the exact same map. She said, "Isn't that a problem?" And I said, "No shit, it is a problem."
Right. Yeah.
Right. And look, I lived in Israel for over a decade. I traveled all over the country. I spoke to many different groups of people. And, whether it's, on the keychains and the coffee mugs being sold in the shuk or in Palestinians' home, I mean, that is the map that they show. They don't show a map of Gaza and parts of the West Bank, right? They don't show that as part of their state. It's all of Israel, right? So that, I think, just kind of encapsulates this whole issue, right, of propaganda. So, that kind of leads to my next question, which I think is just jumping off of what we're talking about is a little more granular, right? So given the history of anti-Semitic propaganda in the Palestinian education system, how can we, in practical terms, encourage Palestinians to move away from this destructive narrative in the aftermath of the current war, particularly when it comes to Gaza's reconstruction efforts?
So I think that what motivates Palestinians to continue all the time fighting us and attacking us, it's not that they're desperate, it's hope. The hope that they can destroy us. And this is something that we need to make clear. They will never be able to destroy us, and we'll never let them have the ability to endanger us again. This means really overriding security responsibility of Israel all over the land of Israel, including Gaza. And this means dismantling all these terror organizations, and it means, as I said, working with local leadership to build some kind of like city-states or emirates or cantonized area, and really encourage a kind of relationships that is more based on prosperity and economy and less on ideology and trying to destroy us. We cannot always control their ideology. We can definitely control their ability to carry out their ideology. And this is why we really need to have a full overriding security responsibility all over the land of Israel and its borders. And while doing that, really try to push the radicalization process, working also with the international community and the Saudis, Emirates,
Right.
to try to bring new programs that will change reality. I think that the day the world, especially the Arab world, will normalize relations with Israel, they will have less motivation to use the Palestinians all the time as a tool to attack us. Because, we'll have peace agreement and they will be in another place. So Palestinians have been for a long time an asset to those who want to delegitimize Israel. And I feel that as time goes by, they are becoming a liability, even to the Arab world. And therefore, the Arab world will be more motivated to agree to a solution that maybe the coming administration might push, which will also benefit Israel and secure Israel for generations.
Right. When I was asking the question, it's like I was thinking very mechanical or technical on the ground, right? Like, what do you do with the education system? But I think what you're pointing out, which is a very good point, is that there's a much bigger picture here, which is as long as the Palestinians see that they have support from the Arab world to continue on this path of destroying the Jewish state, then that gives them hope. And you can see from, video interviews, right, with even teenagers, right, Palestinian teenagers, they're like, we love Nasrallah. Nasrallah stood up for us. Hezbollah stood up for us. So as long as they keep seeing that, right, so it's kind of an education from the
Yeah,
outside in,
to
right?
me, the Palestinians in a way are like a grocery store that think that are Amazon. Now, why they think they're Amazon and not a grocery store? Because the whole world is dealing with them all the time. Like it's a big deal, you know. They're not dealing with Africa. They're not dealing with the endless amount of problems globally. They're dealing with a bunch of people that cannot benefit them in any way. They're not creating technologies. They're not solving, moral issues. They're not writers. They don't publish any books. Um, and this gives them a feeling like this. They're a big deal. But I think that the day that we'll see the international community and the Arab countries moving towards different future, towards different interests and not dealing all the time with this issue, then they will, be in a place that connects them more to reality and to solutions that, can be implemented on the ground, and not have this feeling that really they will be able at the end of the day to destroy the state of Israel.
Right. So on that topic, right, of normalization, right, in the Arab world, so recently Saudi Arabia became increasingly vocal in its criticism of Israel and support for Iran. With China's mediation, it appears Saudi Arabia is working to rebuild ties with Iran marked by joint military exercises and economic cooperation. So this shift is a sharp departure from the period of the Abraham Accords in 2020 when Saudi Arabia seemed more open to normalization with Israel. In terms of threat perception, what do you believe is driving Saudi Arabia's pivot now toward Iran? Like, in other words, what do you think is happening behind the scenes regarding Saudi Arabia's strategic calculus? And is there anything Israel can do to influence this shift?
The Saudis are sending America a very clear message. If you will not stand fully with us, we might consider our alliances, and we might move, towards the Eastern alliance and not the Western one. And it's mainly a message to the U.S. Because the U.S. has shifted several times its position on Saudi Arabia since Obama's administration, mainly because the U.S. is not dependent anymore on Middle Eastern oil. It feels freer to, shift alliances, work more with the Iranians, then go back to the Saudis and so on. So I think this probably will change with the coming administration. And if the US will be willing to stand strong and deal with the Iranian threat, it will be able also to bring about this alliance, this Western Israeli Sunni alliance, and normalize relations between Israel and the Saudis and the Sunni world. As long as the US will show leadership and strength, then the Saudis will side with the West and with Israel and will normalize relations.
Right. So you think that they're sending a message right now to the US by making those very public announcements?
Definitely. Definitely.
Right.
Because with Israel, they have a lot of relations and there's a lot of discussions, but I think that they will definitely stand with the West and America and Israel once America is willing to show strength and deal with Iran.
Interesting. So, in that vein, right, we do have a new administration coming in the United States. What do you believe is the optimal path forward for the US and Israel when it comes to collaboratively addressing terrorist threats in the Middle East? Like what is the broader vision that you want to share for the region?
So I think that I can see three steps. First one is dealing with Iran and bringing down the Shia axis. Bringing down the Shia axis, if Iran is dealt with, can help also taking countries like Iraq or Lebanon out of the Iranian control and into a Western alliance. Once we deal with the Iranians, I think that there will be the ability to push regional and global peace agreements. As I said, that will extend all the way to Indonesia, Malaysia, Pakistan, Oman, Saudi Arabia, building new routes of trade from India to UAE and from there on the ground to Israel, making Israel really the Singapore of the world. And following that, dealing with a solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that will be one that will secure Israel, that will enable sovereignty over the Jordan Valley and vast areas in Judea and Samaria, and really create the terms for Israel to be secure for generations, and also create self-governance for the Palestinians in designated area where they control, but overriding security Israeli all over the land of Israel and the borders. And I definitely can see this coming year or two, all this happening. And I think, and I say it many times, that the bigger the win will be, the more decisive the win will be, the greater the golden age of Israel and the Jewish people will be the day after. We're in a period of time where the day after we'll see peace agreements, the economy blooming, massive aliyah to Israel, baby boom. There's a great, great future awaiting for us, but it requires staying united, winning decisively, and then everything will open, and it will be a great period of time for Israel and the Jewish people.